Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to this session talking about how we're going to harness AI to revolutionize risk intelligence. My name is Adrian Poole. I look after Google Cloud's financial services business in the UK&I, and I'm very pleased to be working with Deloitte on a joint partnership to create a solution. Now, a question for you all and some activity. Raise your hands. Who here works within or is connected to financial services? Oh, it's a good show of hands. Great, the message got out. Hands up, keep going, keep going. And then out of that group, who's involved in insurance? Okay, you're going to be really pleased about this. There are applicabilities elsewhere, and I think this is a fascinating concept that we're going to talk you through today. So, if you've been to these things before, we'll welcome your feedback. The app is available, I think, 20 minutes into the talk, so please utilize that. We'd love to hear your feedback. I've introduced myself. Shortly, Guru will come, who leads Deloitte's AI practice for financial services, and Sulabh, who leads Deloitte's AI intelligence business. So, we all know there's a lot of disruption around in the consumer world. The largest taxi company in the world owns no vehicles. One of the world's largest media companies owns and creates no content. And one of the world's most valuable retail companies has no inventory. And you all know the worldwide accommodation provider and the leader actually owns no property. So lots of disruption. And actually, it's changing how we live, how we behave, and what we do, and how we consume products. Can I just check? At the back, can you hear me over the football? If you can't hear me, put your hand up and I'll speak up a little bit louder. So, what these things are doing are changing how we behave, and they're revolutionizing how we behave as consumers, but that's also beginning to translate and migrate into the world of business. We see faster moving fintechs creating and challenging established players, creating new operating models. And so, if we look at financial services now, the headlines are, fundamentally, banks, insurers, cap market players are fighting and struggling with getting return on equity above double digits. And there are a number of things they're trying to do to change that. They're looking at how they capture new sources of revenue. They're looking at how they retain their clients better. They're looking at how they improve their operations, take cost out, improve their processes, reduce the time for those processes. All of those steps, they're looking for innovation, for new ways of achieving those things. And I think the cloud is one of those ways of helping. And it's an enabler to those business problems and solving those solutions. I've been with Google Cloud now for 4 years, and I arrived at the point where the Financial Conduct Authority had released its white papers to say, yeah, we think the cloud could be okay. We're not quite sure, but we think it's worth exploring. And at that point, there was limited cloud adoption. Most infrastructure was on-premise. There were security and privacy concerns. And it was taking time to educate both internal compliance and security people within organizations and also educate regulators as to how to cope with this new paradigm. Where we are now is much wider adoption of the cloud, using workloads that the regulator considers to be material outsourcing, so very significant for the organizations that are using those workloads. And banks are starting to really step up what they're doing and how they're doing it. So we have announcements such as Atom Bank, who are moving all onto Google Cloud. We already knew about Revolut, who'd moved onto Google Cloud. We're also hearing about larger organizations that are moving their grid workloads over and seeing huge benefits to how they look at their risk and their pricing calculations. And we're talking significant volumes, 30,000, 50,000 cores to do their calculations. Within finance and risk organizations, we're seeing some risk calculations that used to take 4 hours be done in a minute. We're seeing some liquidity calculations that used to take 100 hours to calculate being done in 90 minutes. And what that change means, it changes the departments and it changes their ways of working, and it makes people think about how they're approaching these problems in that business. And I think to get to that point, all those organizations have got through security internally, they've got through the process with the regulator, and as they say, the regulator never approves a workload, but the regulator stops asking questions. And so what these organizations are doing, they're using the cloud, and it's, in a way, it's democratizing the availability of innovation, and in particular, in our use case here with Deloitte called on-site AI, it's democratizing data. Yesterday, there was a panel discussion with Admiral Insurer, and they were talking about their plans to effectively democratize data, bring their vast data sets together, and allow that to be utilized, obviously with the right kind of fine-grained controls, but to allow their analysts to start looking at much bigger data sets to get insights to their clients, to be able to write better policies, get their pricing more sharply aligned around underwriting, but also helping them get a higher percentage of renewals at the end of a particular period. Let's move on. And I think what you get from Google is, we're already renowned for being very good with data, but actually you can bring the best of Google together. And in this particular example, it's some of the data and analytics tools that Google's got, along with our Maps capabilities, that brings together a solution to help with particularly commercial property, and how commercial property is assessed, and the prices and quotes are provided to the commercial users. And I think that agility and that ability that Google offers for people to become more agile in the way they develop solutions and be first to market with new ideas, I think is what's helping us take a real step forward in the marketplace. And I think at this point, I'm going to hand over to Guru, who's going to take over and take you through the solution. Thanks, Guru.
Adrian. Cheers, thanks a lot. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me. One thing I've noticed is, despite all the progress in technology, our penalty-taking abilities in this country have not changed for about 30 years. So I think we better watch out for the balls coming from the other side. So as Adrian kindly said, my name is Guru Johal. I lead our global financial services AI business, which means I get a real insight into how we help our clients use AI and cloud technologies to create real business transformation. What does that really mean? And we'll talk about this. Given the number of hands that were up here from financial services, I'm sure you all appreciate the challenges financial services are facing at the moment. Whether you're a bank, an insurer, a wealth manager, or a capital markets person, those challenges are quite consistent. You have a number of things. You're having challenges around really understanding your customer and the insights that they bring. You're having real challenge around personalization and some of the experiences that people have in their personal when they interact to buy things compared to how they interact with financial services clients. You're seeing competition really disrupt. Adrian mentioned one of the challenger banks, but essentially what you're seeing is a bifurcation of the market, where in our view either you're scale or you're agile, and the mid-market players are really going to have some challenges along the way. There are a number of other challenges. There's challenges around profitability, trust, regulatory pressures, operational efficiencies, et cetera, et cetera. So there are lots of things happening at the moment, and the historical bonds that held financial services companies together are essentially going to struggle with emerging and existing capabilities coming together. You're having leaner, more cost-effective processes and technology players seriously disrupting the market. I was with the CEO of one of the largest insurance startups, if not the largest insurance startup, where they have $1 billion of committed capital. And they were giving us an example. They said, he specifically said, he said two things. One is, I don't want to do something I'm not good at. So I don't want to be a tech company. I don't want to understand how to run accounting systems. I want to be able to select and price risk better than anybody else. They've outsourced most of their operations. 3% saving on expenses is a 5% ROE. So you can see how these things are making a real difference in that. And I think if you look back historically, the assets you had of scale, the physical cost efficiencies you'd get, it's now being replaced by scale of data. If you have data, right, you can use the right techniques to overcome cost disadvantage. The mass, what I'd say, standardized products have disappeared. The physical assets, and now you're going to customization. And you just need to look at where most of the bars are and look up on the brickwork as you enter in. It's probably a name of a bank. And for those of you who are too young to be here who remember banks and their branches, which there are many, it's where people used to physically go in and pay checks. All that has changed. But also, more importantly, your competitive advantage came through scaling either talent, so either getting more people or functional training. And today, it's talent and technology, humans with machines. So what does that all mean? So we're going to focus on commercial insurance as an example. What will be clear at the end of this is just the start of a journey. Commercial property has hundreds of billions of premiums written across the world. And actually, when you think about it, it's a pretty standardized, data-rich product that requires data to rate it, but that is a huge challenge. I have worked in the industry for 25 years. I'm an actuary by background. I've sat with underwriters. I've seen the weeks it takes for information to get analyzed. And physically sending people out to look at properties means you can only look at about 10, 15 of your properties. The number of people who don't know the actual risks of what they're insuring is scary. And then you put into the point that Adrian made about the democratization of data, which essentially means some of the data asymmetry challenges are now being addressed for reinsurers and capital markets. It's an interesting marketplace. So it's not surprising that this is one of the areas we looked at first, because we can see a number of, challenges that we think can be overcome using AI cloud technologies. Hopefully not all of this is new to you, but essentially what we're saying is it's very clear that some of the information required to price is hard to get, harder than it should be. You look at information coming from a broker, that gets passed on to an insurer, that gets passed on to an offshore center where you have lots of data entry. You realize the broker hasn't filled out the last 300 rows. That gets sent back. There's a whole toing and froing before it gets to the underwriter who puts it through a pricing model. I've seen that happen. I've seen that happen with some of the biggest brands in the market, where we've actually spent some time with people to go through this. Essentially, it's taking weeks to bind risks. What do we think? I think this data is available today. It's available easily. We can get you information on a property in 8 seconds. We can get you information on a property in 8 seconds. You compare that to how long it takes. Now, you still have to go through the underwriting process, but at least you're not fighting the data. Insurers still think data is going to be their USP, and I struggle with that. Your USP has to be about risk solutions and pricing. You get information and you just think of the whole customer experience, whether you're a broker or a client, it's painful. It's something that is going to lead to more churn in the market. Financially, and the best way to get attention sometimes is financially, to say, if you look at the lost cost, the opportunity cost of underwriting portfolios that take 4 weeks, 3 weeks, compared to what you're good today, that's real revenue that's just walked out of the building. How do you capture that? How do you really look at that and say, we can see value drivers that will be unlocked by getting this information quickly? What's also interesting is insurers assess risk by looking at data and little things, and you can see the number of really smart players who are looking at the market and saying, I know if the property was on the bottom of a hill compared to top of the hill, my flood risk is very different. Yet you still have people pricing in postcodes. I know if the property is a beachfront property compared to 3 streets down, it's a very different exposure to wind and storm. Now, intuitively people get that, and everyone says we consider that. Reality is, in a competitive market, that information isn't always used. And that's one of the challenges we see, is actually not only getting the traditional factors you're looking at, but let's be smarter than the competition. let's look at what's a meter away from your risk, what's 10 meters away, what's 100 meters away, what's a kilometer away. That information is important, and people obviously think about it, but getting access to that in a timely way is challenging. We have been working with Google to essentially pull together a solution that we will revolutionize the underwriting process. We're starting with property. There will be a prize for anyone who can come up with a better name than what we currently have. It's a working title, so please bear with me. I will personally get you a bottle of wine if you can get to a better name. So we're going to play this and just take you through what we've done to give you a sense of the type of information you can get and how quickly you can get it. And whilst it's playing, I'll hand over to Sulabh Soral, who really is the brains behind a lot of this. Thank you.
Okay, how's everybody? That was a beautiful video made by my data scientists, and now they are really good advertisers too. So I'm going to talk about this labor of love, really, that's what I call it, because Gurpreet and my team has been on this journey for the last 3 years. It took a lot of research to get to where we are today, and then for the last 1 year, we've been working with Google to get this platform built. So what I'm going to talk about over the next couple of minutes is what it really is, how it works, some technology aspects of it, and then I'll hand over back to Gurpreet to talk a bit about the extended use cases, what next from here. So the first thing is, what is this solution? As Guru explained, the thing we are trying to solve is, how do you get information on a property for the underwriters to underwrite at a click of a button, right? The kind of information that insurers require for properties is, what is a property made of? How tall is it? How many floors does it have? Who's the occupier? What does the roof look like? Does it have a balcony? Like, if you think about in Japan, when an earthquake hits, the first thing that falls down is the balcony, right? And it causes trouble. So there are lots of those kind of things that underwriters require, and these are very intuitive information, but there is no single database that has all of this information together. So the challenge we had was, how do we combine data from satellites, data from overhead flying aircraft, data from street level imagery, data from maps, data from news media, data from social media, and from many different other sources, to create a digital footprint of a property such that we can analyze it architecturally as well as assess it for many types of risks, such as fire, the probability of fire happening, the probability of if a flood hit, what happens? If an earthquake hits, what happens? It's that kind of thing that we have to build. And there was another thing while we were building this platform. When an underwriter or a large global insurer underwrites a portfolio, these portfolios are typically global scalable. Now think about a hotel chain. I won't name any. But if you think about a hotel chain, and if an underwriter writes this hotel chain, they're not only going to write properties in the UK, they need access to information across the globe. So there are two elements to this. One is the large global scale and the complexity, the democratization of data, the large scale of it. And the second is the global nature of it. So that's when Google Cloud, Google and Deloitte came together to create this kind of platform. And you can look at some of the variables that insurers require. They need information on the architecture itself, such as plot area, what is the roof made of. They need information on the facade. For example, like does it have a certain type of design on it? Does it have certain types of ornamentation on it? They need information on the local surrounding analytics, like Guru mentioned, the distance to the ocean, the distance to waterfronts, the distance to certain types of other types of businesses, hazardous material storage facilities. And also, lots of information on what's happening inside the building. Does it have certain things that it should have for for safety? So putting all of this information together from these multiple different global data sources is one of the big challenges that we tried to resolve. How did we do that? Now we did it through AI, and I'm going to talk a bit about the architecture and the kind of models that were used. But actually, what we were able to do is we were able to change the way in which properties were assessed from a couple of hours or weeks to under 8 seconds. So we can, with a click of a button, in 8 seconds, assess properties. And that's the big change we are doing. Now, it's not only a process change. This is not only about time. If you can change it to 8 seconds, commercial property insurers can actually change the proposition. You can finally have digital propositions in commercial property insurance. So it has a much larger impact in terms of the product itself. Right. So a bit about the technology since we are at Google Cloud. Right. So how the system works is it's hit with addresses. So what brokers of insurers give is basically the addresses of the portfolios they would wish to underwrite. When that hits the system, the AI in the system actually figures out, first of all, what that property is, and hits multiple different data providers and data sources. It hits things like key services like has there crime happened there? So these are all open data sources provided by open platforms like crime, fire, health. It hits geospatial services providers, understands the location, how many points of interest are there. It hits local imagery. It hits satellite APIs. Lots of different structured and unstructured information sources are hit. And what the AI is doing is it's trying to figure out which of these data sources are most relevant to the risk that's being assessed. And if they are relevant, are they the ones that I should use, and how should I combine all of this information to predict the variables that we discussed in the previous slides? So that's where the complexity is really coming. The AI is being used to stitch together data, to extract features, and then being able to predict for risk. Now, all of these services are hit, and our platform is on Google Cloud. And the reason is clear, that we need to be able to, because of the global nature, we need to be able to auto-scale very quickly. We need to be able to connect and run very significantly heavy machine learning algorithms, and that's where all of the solution is sat. Some of the components that we are using, I'll give examples, are things like pub sub, right? So this is something which has multiple publishers and multiple subscribers. Because imagine this condition, we are talking to multiple different APIs across the globe, lots of insurers are using it, and lots of brokers might be uploading different types of informations in it. So therefore, it has to be that kind of auto-scalable as well as basically a multiple publishers and subscribers kind of model. We use multiple different database technologies, and that's because such as BigQuery, such as Cloud SQL. We're using all of these because we have many different types of formats and many different types of requirements from data. So we use LiDAR, which is different. We use POI and maps, that's different. When you think about imagery, we use a lot of imagery, that's basically different. So a lot of different databases versus data pipelines are being used. Compute, we use right from CPUs to GPUs to TPUs. In fact, this is one of the heavy use cases of TPUs. In fact, one of the first that I've seen, which is now we're putting in production, at least to my knowledge. Because guess what? If you look at the algorithms we use, even if you have to predict what the roof looks like or what the roof is made up of, we pick up the satellite images, we pick up LiDAR, we train algorithms, computer vision algorithms like convolutional neural nets to extract features. Then we have another algorithms to validate those features, and downstream it gets to predict that the roof is made of concrete, or it's hipped, or it's flat. So there are lots of different services that come into play. And some of the AI frameworks that we use, machine learning frameworks we use, PyTorch, Keras, TensorFlow, and all of these actually come together. Different types of, it's not only convolutional neural nets we are using, we use convolutional neural nets as well as basically like language models, because we are also looking at social media to figure out, hey, is anybody tweeting about there is a flood warning for this area? And that kind of thing. So we're looking at live social media and news also. That's why we have to look at those kind of things. So we have a booth, and if anybody's interested in the technology, you can come over to the Deloitte booth and we can discuss a bit more. But at the end of this slide, what I want to basically say, it's a highly complex platform where multiple technologies are coming together, and we are using, and the trick is how do you really use all of these data services as well as cloud services with AI together to generate these results in under 8 seconds. That's the challenge, guys. Right, so as I've said, I won't labor on this slide a lot, but the first thing that this platform does is seamless integration. Our platform has endpoints, and insurers can consume that API for their downstream applications. So for example, it could get connected to your insurer's workbenches. We also have a front end where you can upload and download information. But seamless integration to insurers' systems. It's obviously a scalable solution. It is a global solution. It's flexible. That's the important thing, is it's flexible and available on demand, and that's where the publisher and subscriber model comes in. So that is like flexible and available on demand. You can choose the modules you would like to use. But also, no solution of this complexity can be utilized effectively by the financial services industries or insurers if there is not an extensive on-the-ground network of data scientists, actuaries, underwriting support to be able to sort of utilize it in insurance systems. And that's why we have created an extensive data science support and a solution support group globally, because Deloitte operates globally and Google also operates globally. And with this, I'm going to hand it back to Gurpreet, who's going to talk about some of the more use cases.
Thank you, Sulabh. So hopefully you got a flavor of what it actually is and how it works and some of the smarts around it. So a few more things. Whilst that use case was specific around risk assessment, the applicability, and I'm just sticking in the insurance swim lane over here, the applicability across is huge. So for example, if you think about one of the biggest challenges underwriters face is triaging and selection. So we're looking at an insurer who is huge, and they're looking at the risks that are coming through to them from their brokers. And their challenge is actually quite simple. From our information, from our claims information, we have a good sense of what is good and what is bad. So we know we like properties over 7 stories that are next to excuse me, an M&S or something, right? So they have a real idea of what they're looking for. You layer that with particular industries or sub-industries they're interested in. Is it florists? Is it supermarkets? Is it types of professionals? You layer that with the risk appetite they have. And actually, when you have an underwriter sitting there with 1,000 risks that they have to think about and which ones do they go after, the ability to feed this information to go and select those risks is huge. So rather than starting from the first one they came in the morning, through to actually, I need risk number 70, 87, 342, and I need to prioritize those. So there's already some work around unlocking value through the underwriting triage process. Another quick example, and I want to leave enough time for some questions, another quick example that we're seeing is around portfolio analysis. You talk about data asymmetry between the client, the insurer, the reinsurer. Actually, if I was a reinsurer and I look at the information I get, I'm probably reinsuring 10, 20 insurers with the underlying data and the exposure I'm actually analyzing. I don't have the specifics of what the buildings are. Through a system like this, nothing stops me from feeding the entire portfolio through it to get the modifiers that I could use to rate it. So actually the whole data asymmetry question gets answered in a very different way, which becomes quite interesting for capital market providers too. So there are a few use cases here that we want to talk about, and I think what is clear is, of course, there'll be ecosystems that we're going to work with, but the global scaling is what interests people. You just got to read the FT articles from some of the big CEOs saying, we realize we're going to be up against, the FANGs or the GAFAs in insurance, in banking. How are we going to compete with them? How do we partner with them in a way that still maintains our USP, but leverages their USP? Now, insurance is just a start, and not surprisingly, we see property as just a start. So we're already looking at different lines of business. Getting information about a property enables lots of things to happen. To one extreme, you can see why a global market exchange could be enabled by this. If you've got a standardized product, you have access to data and real-time information to enable to make a price. There is no reason why you couldn't have a real-time exchange. In fact, a number of insurers and marketplaces are looking at that today as we speak. You look at extending this to infrastructure projects, essentially using exactly what Sulabh was talking about in terms of imagery, drone footage, map information, and that's why partners like the ones we're working with and Google are making a massive difference. So we can see this expanding in a number of areas, and just wanted to bring this to life for you. So hopefully you found this interesting. You've seen a real-life use case of something that I think will have quite an impact in the insurance space, and indeed, I think, broader financial services. We already have banks that are interested in learning more about this. And we've got about 15 minutes, and we can do a Q&A or give you some time back in your diary, whichever one you want. Questions? I don't know whether we have a facilitator. Oh, we got a roving mic. Feel free to ask Adrian questions too, by the way. Any questions, any comments, any thoughts? Okay. Yes, sorry, just get a...
So I was going to ask whether you can see this applying to other areas of insurance, like car insurance. Could you, map where somebody's driving, where they live, where they work? I don't know.
So, was the question car insurance?
Yeah.
So this actually started in the motor insurance space in the UK, where we essentially risk rated every 50 centimeters of road in the UK for risk of an accident and severity of an accident. For those of you who know the motor insurance market in the UK, it's quite an interesting one where you have most of it through aggregators, very price competitive. We're actually working with a major insurer to launch a product which was very much not how you drive, because there's a fear about telematics, but where and when you drive. We were actually able to risk rate more accurately the risk of accidents using the data we were getting from this, compared to an insurer who had been in business for over 100 years. So that was an interesting finding in itself. So I can see an application for this in many ways, right? So we're talking to one of the large banks, looking at examples of where their branches are and how they're getting efficient use of branches depending on footfall or structures around branches. We can see this being used in infrastructure type projects, construction projects. We can see this being used in fleet insurance, as, once you get more additional data through. Essentially, it's a platform that's able to consume, and Sulabh showed that, structured and unstructured data, particularly unstructured data, with some real smarts around extracting that information, being able to compute it and provide an insight. So, looking at construction, particularly in the US, where you have massive, sensors, you have lots of big projects, cranes moving around, how do you get that information and analyze it as real time as you can? So I can see applicability in fleet, motor, construction, infrastructure projects, property more broadly for banks, etc. Thank you.
I was just wondering about competition. Is there anybody else building solutions like this?
So, and that's, by the way, that's from a Deloitte person, right? So that's even a harsher question than I expected. So good question. I'm sure they are, and we know of a few that are very deep in certain areas, particularly, say in insurance in the UK or marine insurance somewhere else. What we find is what's making a difference is the scalability of this platform, right? How do we get global? Do you want to be 99% right in one country, or could you live with 90% in 10, 15 countries? And most big financial institutions will take the latter, right? Because already this is giving them an advantage over things they didn't have. I think there's more. I don't think we have such an integrated solution for many of our competitors, or the ones that I've seen, So I'll give you an idea, and Sulabh hinted on it. You're able to geotag every property, every risk. So not property, risk. If you geotag every risk, and again, working through the Google platform, you're able to understand and put in specifics about news feeds that you're looking for. Flood, risk, explosion, civil disturbance, etc., etc. You could have a claims notification system that's pretty much real time, right? That is a game changer, not only from a loss point of view, but dare I say from a capital perspective, where you hold a lot of money for claims that have incurred but have not yet been reported. So there's a whole aspect around this. So I think there will be solutions, and when I talk to clients and we speak, actually what we're looking to do is build an ecosystem. So if there is somebody who has a fantastic image recognition on something, of course we'll pull them into the party. Why not? We recognize the world is changing, and it's about having best athletes. But you need somebody that can do this globally. You need somebody that understands a business problem in a different way. And I think when you get to that stage, you're pretty much looking at one person. Sure.
Hello. What role does price play in your models? Because obviously all these other factors are kind of completely sized by the idea of price. And then secondly, isn't something like this going to become almost a kind of gateway to entry for anyone in the property markets? If you've got, so for anyone in the property market, if you've got a much better set of data about risk, doesn't that massively change the way that people price these things?
So I think price is it's a good point, right? So if you talk to insurers, they believe they have the best insights on how to price a risk. And in fact, every insurer is above average. The question then really becomes is, how are you able to use, so what are you able to do here? You're able to get data quickly. If you're an insurer and your USP is the data, you're in the wrong business. Right? Your USP has to be about risk selection and pricing. So can I use this to price? So where could this take you? I think it will bring into reality the concept of portfolio pricing for insurers, the concept of marginal cost of capital for properties. So there's a whole range this could take you on pricing to make it smarter, right? If I was there, I would say, I know which rows I want to price and which ones I want someone else to pick up the price on. Let them have all the risks. let them pick up the first 10 properties on the slope. I'll take from property 11 to 30. Right? It's a very different risk profile. So price is all relative to the risk and the analysis of the risk, I believe. So I think you will see a change, and the smarter, more analytical ones will bring a difference. Now, of course, you have the reality of the market where the brokers will push a price and the price is set by the market. At least you have a choice of whether you want to price something or not. So not having information is no longer an excuse.
Following on that question from a different perspective, is it a platform that's there for open consumption, as it were? Is that the way you see this, or is this a Deloitte product?
So when you say open consumption, tell me more.
Well, if you wanted to integrate this into a business, but Deloitte weren't the SI, for example, is that feasible and available?
So, well, let me try answering it a different way and tell me if it still answers your question. The vision for this is you could create an exchange where essentially you have a platform where people can participate. Right? That is it. So it is something where you will participate, you're able to get access to information, and you'd have buyers and sellers potentially coming together. And that's a platform there that you pay when you use it. The other options where you have certain insurers that are very keen to try this data to say, could we get this information and see how we would improve our pricing, and that will be a service you provide. I mean, either way, it's has been a sort of Google Deloitte collaboration, so we expect to be playing a significant part of it, recognizing that there are platforms out there that should be open to use. Sure, one more question in the front, thank you.
I realize this is about insurance, but wouldn't this also be useful in a development finance or asset finance context for banks measuring portfolios? For
Asset finance?
Asset finance, yeah.
Yes, I totally agree. I mean, this has got many applications. I mean, if I look at where this insurance to us is the starting point, right? So, actually, if I take this to one of the visions Sulabh and I had was, how do you create the connected supply chain and really understand the connected supply chain of trade, of finance, of physical assets, of mobility, right? And actually, there is a natural extension to that. It's not surprising that banks, and Sulabh's been doing quite a bit of work with some of the banks, looking at properties and saying, you're lending to these assets, right? So you have an asset, you're either building it, you're living in it, you're protecting it, or you're financing it, or you're doing something, right? It's an asset. Same thing with any other types of assets. Absolutely. Right, one last question, if there is. There is a serious price for the name, by the way. That is a very temporary name, so we just wanted you to know that. Sure. We have the name.
Following up on scalability and moving global, how would you tackle this problem in Cyprus, let's say, or Saudi, where the data is not available?
In places where the data is not available?
Yeah, data like street view or satellite images or census data.
You want to try that, Sulabh? I've got a view, but I'll let Sulabh answer that. No. You have a better answer.
So the way this is, the simple answer to that question is we are stitching together different types of data sources. So satellite is sort of like available it's globally from most of the places, but some places it's not. So what we are trying to do is, in the first instance, the known mappable world, wherever it is mappable, where we basically roll out. But the next bit is we are working with satellite providers as well as aerial photography providers, oblique imagery providers, and if there is interest, and as the platform matures, we can map that part of the world. But it's a vision which we have, but we are working with the right providers. Like one of the providers we have just signed up with have their own satellite launch capabilities. That is the scale we are talking about, but that's a journey. Right now, it's the mappable world. Wherever Google Maps is there, that's where we can basically get satellites on top of it, and as well as oblique imagery. And by the way, it is not only imagery. I mean, like, people get focused on that imagery bit. Imagery is one, crowds are another one. So the platform has the capability to take in crowd-sourced information, as well as customer-sourced information. So one of the things we have done is, hey, if you still want to use the platform, just provide a photograph, just provide a video, walk through and provide a video. You don't need to fill forms of, I have 10 computers and this is what I have. The system will auto-catalog. So this is basically, it's like collective intelligence. So you have these global data providers as well as swarms, as it were, and all of that will come together. Well, that's really a journey. The other bit is open social media. So, like, for example, you look at Twitter. One of the things we have done is through the use of NLP and combining with news APIs such as BBC World, as well as other local news agencies as we roll out in different countries. We've got lots of them. What we are doing is we are aggregating information. So if somebody's tweeting from somewhere and mentions an entity name, then we know the entity is there. So you could sort of like start building information like that. So we see that as the platform matures, it sort of will fill in the blanks of where data is not available, if you know what I mean. But then on top of that, our data providers will be able to map because there's interest there.
I knew you'd have a better answer than me.